Hey everybody, I just want to welcome y'all to the latest edition of the Gardener's Tool Shed. We've been talking a lot this year about how to get things growing, how to get things started, how to take care of them once you've got those going in your garden. And today we're going to talk about seed collection. We're kind of wrapping everything up as the end of our season approaches. For those of you who have not been with us before, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Celeste Scott, and I'm the UT Extension Horticulture Agent here in Madison County. The Gardener's Tool Shed is a class that's free and open to the public, and I encourage you to share this information with those around you and invite more people to the classes. We actually only have one more session left for 2021, and that's going to be another class where we're kind of wrapping things up for the end of the year. We're going to talk about preservation. So we're going to talk a lot about drying flowers, pressing flowers, and how to keep those blooms and things looking well into the fall and winter in your home, and some ideas on how to use those for decor and some other things like that. So lots of fun things going on here as we come into fall for 2021. And so let's just jump right in. So today I want to introduce you all to the concept of seed collection. And we want to talk a little bit about, what are some of the key points that you need to keep in mind before we get into all these wonderful pictures that I have to share with y'all today. So first of all, I hope that through our class today, you kind of learn a little bit more about where to look on the plant to find the seed. You're probably thinking, Celeste, that's a little obvious, honey. Well, you would think that, but it can be a little tricky. Sometimes you look at a dried down flower head and you're not really sure which part of that is the seed, right? And so we need to be careful when we're breaking into those dried flower heads and seed pods to make sure that we're not injuring the actual seed when we're doing that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. The next thing we want to keep in mind is when it's time to harvest, we want to make sure that we are harvesting fully matured seed. Once you remove those seeds from the plant, they're not going to continue to develop. They may continue to dry out a bit more. We'll say this an example like beans, right? So you can harvest a bean in a pod that's fully developed, but the beans themselves may still be succulent. So they may continue to dry out, but they're not going to continue to develop. So we want to make sure that the area where those seeds are developing, that those seeds are actually mature. Also, we want to keep our eye out for dry conditions. And what I mean by this is, we don't want any moisture involved in our collection process. So I don't want you going out there first thing in the morning after a heavy dew and collecting seed. We don't need to plan on going and doing our seed collection right after a rain, okay? We want to give those garden areas a few days to dry out. It would be ideal if we could do our collection, in midday when we've got a lot of sunlight. We know there's been a lot of drying going on in that garden, and I can be relatively certain that we have very little moisture in those collections. And then finally, when we get around to storing our seeds, we need to make sure, again, that moisture is absent and that we have a very low humidity storage situation. For me, I prefer to store seeds in these nice little paper envelopes. Allows for a little bit of air exchange if there is, if some moisture does continue to be pulled out of those seeds. I know I'm not going to I'll have less likely of a situation of having mold develop as compared to if I was storing those seeds in plastic. So I try to stay away from plastic, and I encourage others to stay away from plastic as well. Now, once we do get them in our packet, it's fine to put them into some type of airtight container, okay? But again, we want to make sure that it's dry, free of moisture. And then finally, you may be thinking, well, my friend down the road always stores their seeds in their extra refrigerator, in the garage or somewhere, or they always store their seeds in an airtight container in the freezer. And you may be wondering, why is that? So it's actually not always about the temperature. A freezer can be a really good place to store seed long term because there's very low humidity in a freezer. Okay, we're not opening and closing that door all the time. The temperature stays relatively consistent, and those humidity levels are low. And same goes for, that extra fridge that you have out in the garage. You're not opening and closing that door as frequently as you are your refrigerator in your home that you're using on a regular basis. So if you ever wondered why that is, that might be a few of the reasons. And some people might be doing it and they don't even know why they're doing it. And then another little device that I like to introduce to folks are these little mesh sachets, I guess you call them. I like to use them for a number of different things. You can use them if you are trying to let some seed heads kind of dry out, like they were ready to be harvested from the plant, but maybe you don't have time to dehisce them or to get those seeds separated at the moment. You can just stick them in these little sachets, tie them up and hang them somewhere, and that's going to allow them to continue to dry out over time until you get ready to separate them out. I also like to use them on the plant out in the garden. So some seed pods, as they mature, when they get ready to be harvested, like when the seeds are at the perfect time, those seed pods just pop open. They just burst open. And that could be from, a light breeze that touches it and causes them to burst open, a bird, insect, anything. And those pods will just pop right open. And for those type of seeds, I like to use these mesh sachets because I know, well, hopefully I won't miss my window of opportunity with harvesting those seeds. So go ahead and pop it over the seed pod as it's drying out. Don't pull it off the plant. Just put the sachet on the seed pod on the plant and let it sit there until you walk by and you see that those seeds have released themselves into your sachet. It can also be used as a protective covering to kind of help with some insects that we're going to show you here in a little bit. So lots of different little uses for those guys. And I didn't have a picture of this to put in the photo, but it might be handy just to get some regular old, like small sandwich, like paper sandwich bags, you know what I mean? Like that you used to take your sack lunch in. I like to have several of those when I'm going out into the garden and I'm harvesting. I can just cut lots of stems of one particular plant and shove them in that paper bag. Maybe put a rubber band around the top of it to keep them from falling out. And then that way I'm relatively sure that I'm not getting plants and seeds mixed together. I have in the past just taken a bucket and shoved everything in there, and then you get inside and you're like, oh, now I have all these random seeds that have accidentally fallen out of these seed heads. And just, trying to save you a little work on the front end. Okay, so get you a stash of paper bags to help with harvesting out in the garden. All right, so once you get those seeds inside and we get those separated out, I have a few little tips and tricks actually to help you with separating out some of that trash from your seeds. It's not always super important that we have very, very clean seed. Sometimes I don't even try to mess with it and I just crumble it all up together and call it a day. But in other cases, especially if you're nervous about moisture being involved, it could be important to try to separate out that chaff. So one method that I use is I just kind of will put all the material in like a plate that has a shallow valley in it, you know what I mean? Not a bowl, but not a super flat plate either. And kind of turn it on its side and just do a few light blows across there. And most of the time, if the seeds are heavier, that trash will just blow right out of the seeds, and then you're left with a pretty good clean seed collection. Tweezers can be helpful, but tedious. Try to avoid those type of situations. And then also different grades of fine meshed sieves could be pretty helpful if you want to get some really, really clean seed samples. So once I get those seeds cleaned, a lot of people struggle to get their seeds into these little small envelopes. And I try to be low techy here. I just use a piece of paper, put a good crease in the middle of it, put your seeds in there, and you can just kind of use that as a little funnel to direct those seeds right down into those envelopes. So try not to drive yourself mad, scooping them off the side of the table into your hand and then trying to pour them out of your hand into the envelope, and then your hand is sweaty and then they're sticking all over you. So just use a good old piece of paper, or you could take a piece of paper and just kind of roll it up sideways, make yourself a little funnel. One piece of tape, that's all that took to make that. And that can save you a lot of heartache and spilt seeds, if you will. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the technique of collection, some things we want to stay away from, and now we're going to get into talking about the actual plants. I'm just going to introduce you to some of my favorites, and then we're going to go along from there. And it looks like I have one slide out of order. So we're going to start off talking about those good, reliable garden favorites that I like to call pass-alongs. So most of these plants are plants that I started out with early in my gardening career that gardening mentors, gardening friends actually gave to me from their own gardens. And one of those plants is the beloved cleome, or spider plant. I do love this plant. It's gorgeous. It provides bloom and color in the garden nonstop through heat and drought. I feel like you can just can't hardly kill it. And I wanted to point out to you where the seed pods are. Oops, where the seed pods are here. Let me get my pointer out so y'all can see. Laser pointer, here we go. So you can see here, as these blooms mature, the seed pods develop, and you can see them sticking out right here. And these look kind of like little beans that are sticking out from the side. So I want you to imagine with me here for a minute. Take this bloom. When this plant was younger, this bloom actually started way down here, okay? Those first initial flowers matured into these seed pods. As that happened, the plant continued to grow, and it put on another bloom display right here, okay? As those flowers became pollinated and the ovaries, began to mature into seeds, and they began to produce these seed pods, that plant continued to grow upwards from its terminal bud right at the very top. That's where our upward growth happens. It created another bloom display right here. Same thing happened. As those blooms matured and turned into seeds, it grew up taller and taller. So you can see how much this plant has grown over the season. And this pink one I've been using as an example has had at least 1, 2, 3. Now it's on its 4th whorl. So that would be its 4th bloom on that single individual stem of the year. So it's always important to keep in mind where your flower parts are, right? Not just the attractive petals, but where those sexual reproductive parts of the plant are. Follow those back to the ovaries, and that is where you need to look for your seed pods, your seed pod development, okay? All right, another one of those old-timey favorites is called the 4 o'clock. This plant has a wonderful aroma. It opens up not really 4 o'clock at my house. It waits till about 6 o'clock, especially in the middle of summer. It likes those cooler evenings, and it has a really, really nice, sweet scent. So it's a great attractor for those nighttime pollinators. While it isn't white, like a lot of our attractive nighttime pollinator plants are, it does have that very strong scent, and so that helps direct them towards those plants. This is a great plant. You can see here where the showy part of the flower is. Again, follow my suggestion. Follow those parts all the way back down to where they originate from the plant. And this is where we need to look for that bulging of the ovary. It's usually a swollen type area. You can certainly see how these, the origination of that bud is swollen right there at the base. And so once we see that, that corolla, falls off once the bloom has passed. And when it's fully matured, we're left with a little seed right inside of those green sepals, holding it kind of like a little cup. There's another good picture from a different angle. These are super easy to harvest. I just go out to my plants every, week or so. You can hold a bag underneath them, stick the plant in there, just kind of like bend the top over and give it a good shake. And those seeds are just going to fall right out, okay? Easy collection, easy to store. The seeds are big, so you don't have to worry about separating it out from a lot of trash. It's a great plant, especially for kids, to let them help you go out and collect the seeds on. Right, another one of those awesome pass along plants that I love dearly is the bachelor button. Some people call them cornflowers. I grew up calling them bachelor buttons. They come in an array of different colors. There's all different kinds of cultivars out there now. But I prefer this old-fashioned blue color. And this plant does best if it's seeded in the fall. So it can self-sow itself like pretty well. If you just leave the plant there, let the seed heads turn brown and crusty, let those seeds fall in place, you're gonna get a pretty good stand from year to year. But I do like to go ahead and harvest some of those seeds just in case something crazy happens, or maybe I don't get as thick of a stand as I would have preferred in that particular spot. I know I always have backup seed to be able to go and fill that area in. So just kind of wanted to walk you through what these blooms look like as they begin to wither and dry up. You can see they will kind of turn their heads down. That's a good sign. Actually, that's a sign that they're probably already releasing their seeds once those heads turn down. And here is a good example of one that's good and dry, but hasn't actually turned the head downwards yet. There's an up close picture. And the seeds are right here in the center, not these old wasted sepals around the edge. This is a neat flower. This is Orlea grandiflora, or some people just use a common name, white lace flower. It oftentimes gets mistaken for Queen Anne's lace, though it's not, it doesn't look a whole lot like it, but they do resemble one another. And I really love this plant. Again, this is one of those that can do well seeded in the fall or super early in the spring, and minimal effort, right? You just sprinkle it out in the garden and they seem to have a life of their own. And I think this one's called like white finch, possibly. As those, before we go to look at the seed pod, let's talk about where should we look for the seeds to develop. It's not these petal areas, right? It's right here in the center. Each one of these is an individual flower. Each one of them has its own set of sexual parts. So they're each going to develop their own seeds, okay? So once we get, start looking at this plant after it has started to go downhill, you can see we have clusters of seeds that have formed at the tips of each one of those umbels right there. Aren't those neat? They look pokey, but they're really not that pokey. Love in a Mist, Nigella. It is so lovely. I do not care where this plant comes up in my garden. It doesn't get very tall, maybe a foot and a half, just creates a nice little mound. The foliage is so airy and ferny, and the blooms are beautiful and delicate and like nothing else that you've ever seen in a garden. My kids absolutely love these flowers. My little girl pretends like fairies dance on them because they're so beautiful. But what I'm really into them for is their cool seed pods that they develop. You can see one here in the bottom right-hand corner. They're so funky, they dry well. I like to use them in arrangements just for an added bit of texture, and you can do so many things with them. So Nigella is another neat one. Now, as those seed pods begin to dry, keep your eye out because this is a really easy one to harvest. Now you can see how the top of it is open, and you can see the blackness down in there. Those are the seeds. They're just rolling around and they're loose, like they're being held in a little cup. So when the wind blows or if something comes through there and knocks that seed pod over, it dumps those seeds right out. So super easy to harvest, but make sure when you are harvesting them that you are keeping them upright, like as you're, don't try to rip them off the plant with your hand. Just take a pair of clippers and snip that stem, because if you try to rip it, you're going to spill some of the seeds out. And so we want to be highly efficient in our seed collection efforts. So just snip them off on the stem there, stick those little pods in a paper bag, that paper bag that you're using to help collect things, give it a good little shake, and you're done. That's all it is for seed collection of Lebanon mist. Okay, celotias. Celotias have long been in the southern garden. This is a wheat type celosia, but those old tiny coxcomb type, that you see in all the state or county fair entries are the same situation as far as seed collection goes. So let me point out to you, we're looking at one of these inflorescence here. And so we need to be considering where the seed might be located. So follow my pointer here. This is a flower. This is a flower. This is a flower. This is a flower. Each one of those little bitty cups are its own individual flower. And so where will those seeds be found? Right inside of those little bitty cups. And the neat thing about celosia is it dries well. I cut this for fresh arrangements. All the other flowers will die. I'll take them out and I'm left with some celosia. And sometimes I just leave it in there until it dries down enough that it begins to release its seeds. This is one of those plants that will do that. Not all will. But the seeds that were mature when you harvested it, as they sit there, they will begin to dry out and release themselves, and you'll start seeing little bitty black dots all around your vase. And so if you're wondering what that is, they're your seeds. Okay. So here's an up close picture. I took one, laid it on one of those little shallow dishes I was telling you about earlier. And here's one of those individual flowers with the seed still stuck in it. Okay. So if you just run your hand up and down that, most of the time they'll pop out. But sometimes you'll get quite a bit of trash in there too, like these little, they're kind of strawish in nature. Like think about the texture of wheat straw and how dry and light it is. That is the same texture as these little inflorescence. So once you have shaken that and getting all the seed out that you want, just lean your head over and give it a really light blow, and that'll all blow off and leave these heavier black seeds on the plate. So you'll have a relatively clean seed collection. And it's the same concept with all the celosia types, okay? And there's a picture just from a different angle. This particular celosia is Asian Garden. It was an All-America selection winner several years ago, and it is beautiful. It's just a beautiful sprawling plant. It kind of intermingles with all the other plants that are growing around it. And so I would highly recommend trying that in your cut flower garden. So we'll move right along. Cosmos, again, another one of those old-timey favorites. I love all Cosmos. Cosmos by Pinnatus, the traditional hot pink that you usually associate with a Cosmos with a bright yellow center or white, or the seashells where the petals are kind of horn shaped, if you will. But to top them off is Cosmos sulphureus. Comes in shades of orange and yellow and gold, all those shades in between. And it is just a beautiful bloomer. So I just kind of wanted to step you through the process of what this bloom would look like as it begins to progress towards seed production. And this is going to be the same for the Cosmos by Pinnatus, that you're familiar with. They're going to look the same, okay? So this is what we start with. You can see here, this up here are the sexual reproductive parts of the flower. We'll pick one of those and we'll follow it down, and you see how it's kind of swollen here at the base. Here, this is a better example. Follow it down, you can see where it begins to swell. So that is the location of an ovary. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It goes all around, and then there's a bunch packed in there in the center as well. As that flower begins to wither and dry out, you can see right here, these are the petals, those orange petals. They've just begun to dry up, and the sepals are down here. And what we're left with, do you remember what this was? Remember those sexual flower parts that followed all the way down to the ovary? Those each one of these became fertilized through pollination and has developed into a seed. And you can tell that they're drying out as well. Goes a little farther, all those petals eventually fall away, and all you're left with is this little spray, it's literally a seed head, a head of seeds. All of the other junk really has fallen away at that point. I just take my hand in kind of a claw form and clasp right on the top and pull away. And then this is what we're left with. This is about 5 or 6 flower heads that I harvested last weekend. Isn't that cool? Super easy, fun to do with kids. Another great pass along plant is a Euphorbia snow on the mountain. This is a great, foliar plant. The bloom isn't what's drawing you to this plant, but I do want to point it out because it's important when you're looking for the seeds. The flowers happen in the very, very top of the plant with these bracts that surround it. This is a bloom, this is a bloom, this is a flower, this is a flower. You can see there's tons of flowers inside each one of these bracts here. And that is where your seed development is going to happen. That's where you need to look for it, okay? And they mature kind of early in summer. So start looking for those seeds to be dried out. This area will just kind of turn brown and dingy in about like early July. All right, now I'm going to move on to another section, and this is what I like to call my pollinator favorites, okay? And keep in mind, while, usually when we think about pollinator plants, we're thinking about plants that are attractive to pollinators from the nectar standpoint, right? So what are plants they can feed on? But in this section, we're going to focus on host plants for various pollinators, okay? So if you don't have host plants, you don't have babies. And if you don't have babies, then you won't have as many adult butterflies flitting around everywhere, will you? So dill is one of my favorite things to grow in the garden. Dill, fennel, cilantro, parsley, they're all in the same family, the carrot family. And they are all host plants for the swallowtail caterpillar. Okay, they love eaten on the foliage of these guys. So I try to grow enough for me to use plus enough for them to munch on. And I just really love this picture, and I thought it was a good example of what the seeds are supposed to look like. So these umbelled seed heads will go through a period where sometimes people will harvest them too early. They think, well, they're not bright green and fresh like they used to be, but at the same time, they're not fully dried. So we want to look for white kind of wings along the edges, white, it's more like tan, and then these darker areas in the middle that have stripes on them, okay? That's how you know that they've been, dried down adequately. Okay, so when I harvest these, sometimes I go out with the paper bag, but sometimes, most of the time when I'm harvesting, especially dill, it's because I'm fixing to use them to make pickles. You can see my jar lids there in the background. So I'll go out and I'll cut several umbels at one time. I'll bring that in, and I just take my hand and kind of run it from the base of the stem up towards the actual seeds. So think of like you're doing an umbrella up, inside out, essentially. So I'll do that, and I'll come in with my pruners and make those stems pretty short, just easier for me to hold on to. You can see that little baby bundle I've created now. And then I just take my other hand, hold that bundle over a bowl, and I just kind of tease it. Don't get too rough with them. You don't want to mush all the seeds, but at the same time, I don't want to get all that extra trash in there, all those little hair-like stems, that are holding the little seeds onto the umbel head there. So just gently tease them until all those seeds come off. So easy tips and tricks for harvest of all of the seeds in that family of plants. All right, another neat host plant is the Dutchman's pipe vine, okay? I really like this white veined a Dutchman's pipe vine. It's called Aristolochia frimbiata, but there are others, I mean, that don't have the white veins in them that are also hosts for for the pipe vine swallowtail as well. But I just really like this one in the landscape. It gives an extra little pop, makes it kind of stand out among other plants, and also lets people know that it's not just a weed. It's just growing rampantly among your plants. The bloom, that's what we're looking at right here. They're kind of hidden. You kind of have to get in there and look underneath the leaves to find them. But it's called the Dutchman's pipe vine because the bloom resembles a little pipe, smoking pipe, and it's pretty cool looking. And so, like I mentioned, this plant is the host plant for the pipe vine swallowtail. I should have included pictures of each of these caterpillars so you'd know what to look for. I'll have to go back and add that. So as those blooms mature, you'll see that they become real papery, and they're hanging from the stem almost like a purse almost. And so when we go to harvest that, you want to be really careful that you don't tip it over. Here's an up close picture, and you can just see the little seeds. They were actually stacked very nicely and orderly in each of these sections right here. This one got jostled around a bit. But they have just the cutest little heart-shaped seeds, and there is a tan stripe on one side of them. Here's where I just poured them out on a piece of paper just for you to get a better up-close look at them, see what they look like. Again, this is one that doesn't have a lot of extra trash, so that's nice for harvest. All right, then I think this is the last host plant that I wanted to talk with y'all about today. This is the perennial butterfly weed, the Asclepias tuberosa, that you see growing in pastures and roadsides and ditches. And I have tried to nurture this and help it spread in my home garden, and it really has made a difference in the amount of monarch butterflies that I have in the garden. This is the host plant. Well, the Asclepias genus of plants are the host plants for the monarch caterpillars. This is not a monarch. I couldn't get a picture of a monarch feeding on it. But all different types of pollinators feed on the nectar of these plants as well. So they're providing two things for us. Not only are they host plants, they have a beautiful bloom that pollinators love to visit as well for the nectar. So, let's look at a few more here. Now, this is actually the tropical milkweed, Asclepias curassavica. That's a hard one for me to say. But this tropical milkweed, you know, there's a little controversy on if we should be using it in the garden, but I'm an advocate for using it. It doesn't overwinter here in our zone, and I know further south it can overwinter, and then we run into some issues with disease that it harbors that could then infect the larvae that feed on it the following year. But for us here in Tennessee in Zone 7, that's a non-issue. So I grow this year after year in the garden, and they just love it. Now, this is a monarch that's feeding on the nectar, and you can actually see a monarch caterpillar up here feeding on the foliage there. So I just thought that was a really neat picture. I wanted to make sure and introduce this plant to you all as well. Easily grown from seed. Like I said, this particular one is an annual. You'll have to replant it every year. This one, the tuberosa, is not. It's a perennial. It's going to come back from year after year. But they can both be propagated easily through seed. And this is what their seed pods look like, right here. So long, slender pods. A few things to mention about the Asclepias. There is a bug called the milkweed bug that feeds on the stems and leaves and seeds of Asclepias. So you can see they're all clustered here, and you might be thinking, well, that looks like more than one type of bug, Celeste, and you would be wrong. This is the same bug, but just different life stages of it. So it goes through a partial metamorphosis. You can tell here, so here's one of the younger ones. Here it's gone through an instar stage, and And we've got an older one here. Here it's a little larger, and it's every time it molts, it starts to look more and more like the adult right here. This is what we're looking at for the adult. And so what they're doing, they're using their little piercing mouth parts to feed on those seeds that are inside the pod. And if the seeds get punctured, they are no longer going to be viable and won't have good germination for you. So remember those little mesh sachets I talked about? I like to pop these over just a few seed pods, not a bunch, you know, just 2 or 3 possibly, to help deter those milkweed bugs from feeding on at least a few of my pods. Now, overall, all in all, they're not that destructive. So I wouldn't actually recommend probably control for these because you may be doing more harm than good, right? We don't want to treat with an insecticide because our larvae are feeding on this. It's a host plant, right? So we don't want to be treating it with insecticide, but you might want to give it a good spray with some water, or, you know, scoop these off because they do like to gather, congregate in groups. So you could like scoot them off into, you know, a bag or something. So not super important, but a neat little trick if you want to make sure and preserve a few of those seed pods. Another pest that we have on Asclepias is the oleander aphid. Some people call it the milkweed aphid. And it's right here. You can see them all over. This is a pretty bad infestation. They have yellow bodies and little black legs. And I'm going to point out these little dark brown colored ones to you here. This is a sign that you have some good positive predators going on in your garden. This is a sign that these aphids have actually been parasitized and they are dying. So that's a good sign. Again, here, I probably would not resort to using insecticides, especially if I see good signs of parasitoids on there. I might just use a good heavy stream of water to wash these off, or even just kind of rub them off with my fingers. And then as that seed pod begins to develop and open up, these are the seeds that are held within those pods. They have these beautiful feathery tops to them that'll just carry them in the wind. So again, if you have your little sachet on there, you'll be insured and won't lose those to the wind once they do finally pop open. All right, and now I have a few that I want to introduce to you, a few plants that we'll call off the beaten path. So these are plants that you can certainly propagate from seed. You can easily collect the seed from your own home garden, but maybe aren't the most common plants to start from seed, okay? So Baptisia, thought this is a neat plant to start with. It's native to this area. It can tolerate moist soils. It can also tolerate some drought. The blooms are a good source of nectar for early in the spring. It's one of our earliest blooming plants. And then the seed pods that develop from those blooms are very unique. Again, I like to use these in arrangements. Once they dry, they turn into almost rattles. You can shake those pods, hear the seeds rolling around inside there, and that's how you know that they're good and dry and ready to be harvested. Here I popped one open just so you could see. These two here are not viable. They're not supposed to be gray and withered like that, but this one here that's nice, fat and tan, that would be a healthy seed. So it can be beneficial for you to know what the seed are supposed to look like so that you can weed out the bad ones, okay? Baptisia is one of those plants that you may actually prefer to just propagate through division, but just so you know, can be done through seed. This is a neat plant that's blooming right now. So right now we're towards the end of summer. This is called the woodland sunflower, and you can see it up and down roadsides and in ditches at the moment. And it is a beautiful late bloomer, great for our pollinators and native to the area as well. So I just wanted to point out that you can certainly save the seed heads for these. You can tell how each one, this is an Asteraceae family. So it's a composite flower. That means it has tons and tons of little bitty flowers all grouped together here. Each one of these is going to develop a seed, and so you can harvest this entire head. I would probably wait until we didn't have any more color on here. We want to wait until that entire area is brown to harvest that. Let it dry in a paper bag. Make sure that it's good and lost all that moisture, especially if the sepals are still green. And you can certainly harvest those seeds and start a new patch of native Helianthus somewhere else. Verbena is another cool plant that I feel like people forget about. They can easily propagate that from seed, but again, you can easily propagate it through division. So just depends on what way you want to go. This particular one, I took my fingers and kind of roughed up those spent blooms. You can see there used to be a bloom here, one there, one there, one here, one there, and the seeds are developed down inside that sepal area. And so I roughed those up a bit, and you can see how some of the seeds came out there. Very, very small seeds, so that can be tedious. Coreopsis. We have many native coreopsis here in Tennessee. This particular one is the threadleaf tick seed, is what a lot of people use for a common name. Again, you can harvest these seed heads. There was an array of petals that surrounded this at one point in time. If you're not familiar with what that flower looks like, those have fallen away, left the seed head, and this one is completely dried down, and that's what I would look for when I'm harvesting for seed. Okay. Feverfew is a fun kind of herb. I guess it is an herb, but I use it kind of as a tall ground cover. It spreads underground. It also reseeds itself and creates a nice dense covering for the areas where I don't have a ground cover. And it also keeps me from having to use tons of mulch. And I like the aroma of it. It reminds me of marigolds or chrysanthemums, and you can tell that the bloom is reminiscent of a chrysanthemum as well. These are teeny, teeny, tiny. And here's a picture of them once they've really begun to wither up and get crispy. And this would be the time when I would want to collect these for seed collection. Easy, super easy to reseed. All right, Indian pinks. This is a really cool plant, and this particular, my start that I have in the garden was given to me from a master gardener friend of mine, and it was actually his mother's, and so he divided a piece of that, and I was honored that he shared that plant with me, and I have treasured it. But I did want to tell people, you know, it's a slow grower. So in order for it to get to a clumping size where you would probably feel comfortable sharing that with friends and family, you would need to grow it probably for 4 or 5 years or more before it got to the point where you could do that. So I wanted to teach you how you could harvest seed from this plant. So let's go back. Look right here at the blooms. Here's your stalk, and it has several individual blooms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all born in close proximity to one another here on the tip of the stem. Okay, so we come over here, each one of these, this was a blossom, this was a flower, this was a flower, this was a flower, that was flower, that was flower, that was flower. You catch my drift, right? The bloom has fallen off. That's why we see these blunt areas right here. If that particular flower was fertilized, its base right here where the ovules are, the base, if it was fertilized, they begin to swell because they are forming seed. And that's what we're looking at right here. Okay, so this one, guess it didn't get fertilized. This one looks like it didn't get fertilized, right? But this one did. So we're going to have 2 seeds right there. So it could be important again here for you to use one of those sachet bags since seed production is not always a given. You can just pop it over the top after those blooms have fallen off, and in case some seeds do begin to produce, you're going to have a safeguard, because I'm going to tell you this is one of those seed pods that just pop the seed open as soon as they're ready. If something just barely touches the stem, they just release and spit those seeds out. It's a dispersal mechanism, that helps the plant spread itself farther and farther and farther out in nature. So use those sachets. Here's another good picture of one that developed into a seed. And then if you see this is a little scar, that's where one popped off already. So if you're going down the stem and you see that, you can think, oh no, I was too late. And then you can be sad for a day. Okay. Oh, I spelled bee balm wrong. Look at that. I added an N. So bee balm or Monarda is another plant, super easy to propagate through division, but very easily started from seed as well. So I want to challenge you to, go outside of your comfort zone and try propagating some of these perennial plants from their seed this year. Okay, it'll be fun experiment. This is what that seed head looks like as it begins to dry down. You can tell the petals fall off here. We're left with kind of a little pin cushion type head. This was an up close picture. Each one of these tubes is the actual flower, okay? So you're gonna have a seed at the base of each one of these tubes here. So these are pretty easy to harvest. You cut that stem off, bring it inside, tip it over, give it a few shakes, and those seeds are going to pretty easily fall right out of those tubes. And this was about the size that they're going to be, so super small, okay? Moving right along, coneflower. So Echinacea purpurea is the one that we have, most often in our residential landscapes. Of course, there's lots of other species of Echinacea, right? We have Echinacea tennesseeensis, that's a Tennessee coneflower. There is Echinacea pallida, the pale coneflower. So we've got lots out there, and they're all easily propagated through seed, okay? So let's talk about how to do that. So let's allow those flowers to remain on the plant until they completely dry down. We can't even tell, what used to be the petal, and you're left with this pin cushion right here, okay? This is an excellent picture. I just kind of take my thumb and kind of run it over those bristles until a few become loose and start to pop off. And from there, I just easily, run my thumb across, continue to do that all around that seed head until the majority of those seeds have let loose. And this right here is the actual seed. Oh, here's one all by itself. This whole piece right here is the seed. Okay, this is not a seed. This is not a seed. This is not a seed. That's just trash, right? Just things, other things that release themselves from that seed head. This is the actual seed. Okay. Okay, so how about Shasta daisies and even Rudbeckia, right? Who would have thought? Again, they're both easily propagated through division, but challenge yourself and try, step out of your comfort zone and try a few new things. I'm going to show you a picture here in a minute of one of my favorite Rudbeckias that I encourage you to try. So this is the Shasta daisy as it begins to dry down. And again, it's a composite flower, so it has tons and tons of individual flowers right here in the center. Those are all going to hold their own seeds as it gets fully dried and we begin to harvest. Just wanted to show you what those seeds are going to look like, okay? So this is what you need to be looking for as you are separating out the chaff from the seed. Okay, this is my favorite Rudbeckia. This is Rudbeckia hirta. Indian Summer is one of the cultivars that are my favorite. They have huge, huge blooms, and they just, pack a punch in the landscape, right? That bright yellow. They reseed themselves every year in my garden, and I just love them. And so I want to encourage you to try to save some of these seed heads and plant them in areas, new areas of the garden, so you can enjoy them in more places. And this is what their seed would look like. Same process as the Shasta daisy and that helianthus that I showed you earlier. Yarrow even can be propagated through seed. Again, can be easily propagated through division. But as those seed heads dry down, each one of these is individual flowers, right? So we're going to have a massive amount of seed that's developed. Here we have it drying down even further. Finally, we get a good dry seed head. And when we begin separating out the trash from the seed, this would be what we would be looking for the yarrow seed there. Okay, so now I have moving on to a section of some unique plants and some plants that we are growing at the UT Gardens at the West Tennessee Research and Education Center here in Jackson. Some of these are kind of cool, and I just thought this would be a fun way to wrap things up for today's presentation. So ornamental okra. I love okra. I love regular okra, but the blooms only last one day and they are really pretty. But this ornamental okra, the blooms are much larger. I love the pale yellow of this bloom. And you can see right behind here where we've got the seed pods developing. Instead of an edible okra, like I said, this is not, I mean, some edible okras are also ornamental because they'll have a colored seed pod or colored leaves, but this is an actual ornamental okra, not edible okra, okay? So the seed pod that's formed here actually looks more like a cotton boll than it does an okra pod, and there's a good reason. It's because they're all related, right? And also, this bloom looks strikingly like a hibiscus, does it not? There's a good reason. They're all related. Cotton, hibiscus, okra, let's see, rose of Sharon, all in the same family, okay? As those seed pods begin to dry, you can see they begin to pop open here, those different compartments. And here's an up-close picture. You can see the seeds hanging out in each one of those little cell divisions. And then I cleaned them up out of those pods and got a good up-close picture for y'all so you can see how there are lines of little bitty hairs on these seeds. So I thought that was really pretty. But pretty big seeds, pretty easy to clean and separate for storage. Now I want to talk about a few kind of unique things, okay? So the picture here is a picture of a Black Beauty lily, and I just love this lily. It is actually an Orienpet, what's called an Orienpet hybrid lily, because it's a hybrid between an Oriental and a trumpet lily. And it is just so beautiful. And I just wanted to point a few things out. So it does create a seed pod, you can see here on the right. However, if you try to actually plant those seeds, it'll grow a plant, but it might take up to 7 years or more for you to actually get a blooming plant. And it's also not going to be true to type. So it's not going to be a Black Beauty because hybrids, revert to one of the parents. They're not generally true to type. So if you want a Black Beauty, you need to use bulbs, so vegetative propagation, okay? But just wanted to point out that it does produce seed pods and there are neat little seeds in there. So if even your Asiatic lilies, create these seed pods, and you could technically start those from seed as well, if you have a lot of time on your hands. The tiger lily is a little different. So they're generally sterile and they don't actually produce seed unless they are hand pollinated, if you're a breeder and you're trying to do some crosses there. But they do create these little black, they're called bulbils, bulbils, B-U-L-B-I-L, in the leaf axis here. And oftentimes as the plant matures, those will just fall off. And next year you'll see one single blade, shoot up from that. And this is essentially a type of vegetative propagation. So it has a counterpart that grows underground off of the main roots that are called bulbets. So they're like little baby bulbs essentially. And it'll take several years for those plants to grow into flowering specimens as well, probably, 3 or 4 years. So if you want to plant one of these and have a bloom the next year, you need to order some bulbs online. But it's just a neat little thing. I always get questions about that. What are those? Are those seeds? So no, they're not technically seeds, but a new plant can arise from that. And then one of the last lilies, quote unquote lilies, that I want to talk about today is called the blackberry lily, but it is actually an iris, a type of iris. Several years ago, they moved it to this genus. It used to be, I can't say it good, but Bellamacanda chinensis, and now it's Iris domestica. Okay, so the blades are very reminiscent of an iris. Sometimes I get them confused with my gladiolus even, because they're growing at the same time. I have them in the same place in my garden, and they do look very, very similar. But these will shoot up some very dainty, sweet blooms. The blooms on these are not as imposing as those Orienpets we just looked at, or even the tiger lilies. They have almost an orchid type feel to them. And I just love that bloom, especially when they're planted in mass, right? You have one plant, it's not that impressive, but if you have 10 or 15 plants growing together in a mass, it can make quite an impression. So as those blooms begin to mature, they form into these really neat chartreuse green seed pods. And I love to use these again in arrangements. They dry pretty well, but if you leave them attached onto the plant, as those mature, you see how they curl backwards. Here's a good picture. They split at the seams. So you see each one of these seams right here. They'll split at those seams, peel backwards, and reveal the actual seeds. And it's called a blackberry lily because the seeds look like blackberries. And so when you get ready to harvest these, super easy peasy. You just go out with your hand and just kind of strip these seeds off. And there you go. You can have a new start of blackberry lily patch next year. This is another neat plant that we actually have on the grounds there at the UT Gardens. It's called the showy rattlebox, and it's great for kids. I love to take field trips through this area. We try to plant a whole section of this in the parking lot with this showy rattlebox, but it is actually in the pea family. Hopefully you could tell that from the shape of its bloom. It does have foliage in pairs of 3 there, so that's another clue. And then obviously this pod production here, but once those get mature and turn brown, when the wind blows, or if you come through and shake those stalks, it sounds like a rattle. And you pop one of them open and you have these nice, super shiny black seeds. And that is the perfect time to harvest them right there, when that husk has become papery almost. And one of the last plants I want to talk about today is the castor bean. So, you know, this is a burgundy leaf castor bean. You can see a green leaf one there in the background of this same picture. I love them both, and they can be so fun, and they can create such a big bang for your buck and grown from seed on a yearly basis, okay? So we want to look for the development of the seed pods up inside the plant. So you're going to be looking for these up closer to these the main stem in here, okay? So you're going to have to get up in there and look around. And you can see right here, this is one that has matured and it has begun to dry and split open. Here's a more close picture of that. And they're all going to mature at different times. So this entire section here, they're not all going to come into maturity at the same time. You're going to have a pod here, pod there, pod here, pod there. So you can check back over a series of a month or so and harvest lots and lots of seed. So when you pull that pod, say we're talking about this right here, you pull that off the plant, it breaks into 3 different little sections, if you will. And then you have to pull that section apart to reveal the actual seed. And they kind of look like big ticks. There's the body, there's the head. It kind of grossed me out at first, but it is a neat little thing. And even though the seed pod looks real pokey, it's not. So that could be another fun one to do with kids. But castor bean are poisonous, so you know, try not to let anybody eat it. And that's all we have for today. I hope you've learned a lot about how to harvest seeds, some tips and tricks on how to do that efficiently in your own garden. And I hope the pictures just have really inspired you to get out in the garden and try new things and be adventurous. Okay, if you have any questions, be sure to reach out to me. Again, my name is Celeste Scott. I'm the UT Horticulture Extension Agent in Madison County. You can reach me at cscott52@utk.edu, or my phone number here at the office is 731-668-8543. Have a great day. Bye.